So welcome back, everyone. We will now proceed to pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, June 20th, 2022. The committee resumes its study of sexual and reproductive health and rights of women globally. We now go to Ms. Anderson from the Canadian Partnership for Women and Children's Health. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks so much, and thank you for having me today and for the topic of this critical and important study. I represent a partnership of over 100 organizations, private sector entities, research institutions, and civil society organizations who are based in Canada but work here and around the world to promote women and children's health and rights. And I think I carry many stories with me of the importance of this particular issue. My personal story of having become a mother a few years shy of my 20th birthday, the story of my daughters, the story of my nieces, and the story of the many women that I've met while traveling across this country and across the globe. And one consistent theme comes out, which I think has been touched on by both of our speakers, and that is choice. Choice about with whom, how many, when, and if to have children. This is not a choice only about today. It is an intergenerational choice about the future of yourself, your ability to attain education, to attain livelihood, employment, economic security for yourself and your family. And it's a choice about how you want to build your community. And these are choices that women are making across all areas of this globe. And a choice that is absolutely critical and in fact touches on every aspect of international development. In 2019, over 218 million women and girls of reproductive age were unable to properly access SRHR in low and middle income countries. And that situation has only grown and worsened since the pandemic. Not only has progress been reversed in some places, it has slipped behind. Adolescent advocates, women and girls in the communities that we're talking about, are telling us one thing. They're reinforcing the idea that their needs are being deprioritized in the context of the pandemic, sidelined as non-essential. For any woman of reproductive age who is sexually active, the idea that accessing contraceptive is a sidelined issue is a joke, and it is a problem. What does this mean? Our projections tell us that a 12% average decline in access to modern contraceptive would result in an additional 734,000 unintended pregnancies. A 25% average decline in essential pregnancy-related care results in an additional 134,000 obstetric complications and an additional 3,400 maternal deaths. Already in the space of these testimonies, one woman has died every 2 minutes globally as a result of childbirth or pregnancy. And let me underscore that these are perfectly preventable deaths. They are happening in places that don't have money and not happening in places where there is access to health care. There is no innovation needed here, simply a scale up of doing more of what we know we need to do. A 23% shift in abortions from safe to unsafe will lead to an additional 491,000 unsafe abortions. There are real people behind these numbers. Investment coupled with cohesive policy that ensures SRHR is not a siloed or sidelined issue is critical. We need to invest in intentional, innovative actions that are multisectoral and integrate social determinants of health, central to achieving equitable access to health services for women, adolescent girls, and children, and for their futures. What this means for Canada is that we cannot mask, divert, or subvert the funds that we have clearly allocated for SRHR. We must meet our commitments for consistent, stable, and predictable increases to this funding, which means successfully scaling up to the investment of $700 million in SRHR directly by the end of this year. But investment alone is not enough. The erosion of rights of women and girls, of children and communities, means that we have to have a multifaceted approach to ensure that rights are not further sidelined. We've got to get organized in our diplomacy, in our foreign policy, and line up with a cohesive strategy around SRHR. We have 3 recommendations coming from the Canadian Partnership for Women and Children's Health in this regard. The first is that Canada scale up its spending as it has committed to doing. This means counting what we are spending, tracking what we are spending, and it means that you as parliamentarians are holding Global Affairs Canada and us as actors in civil society accountable. The second recommendation is that Canada embrace its act as a leader globally in SRHR, much like it did in the Muskoka Initiative, to really push other donors to prioritize women and children's health as key, not a sidelined issue, and not an issue to be disregarded when conflict and crisis emerges. And the final is that Canada continue to take a comprehensive health agenda that prioritizes the health rights of women and children and seeks to regain the progress lost over the pandemic. This must and should be a priority for our government now and into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. So we now go to the members. Mr. Bergeron, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You probably heard the testimony from Ms. Vasylenko, which was very troubling concerning what's currently going on in Ukraine, which brings me perhaps to mention a text from a young student in the University of Montreal that was published on the 22nd of February that quoted something from Ms. Pramila Patten, the special representative of the Secretary General of the UN concerning sexual violence in conflict zones. And she said that when women are held for days and raped, when you see a series of genital mutilations, and when Russian soldiers have Viagra, this is clearly a military strategy. And of course, we're talking here about Ukraine, but we could be speaking about many other situations of military conflicts where sexual violence has been used as a military strategy. And we can think about the Tigray region, for example. So are these phenomena that were reported to your knowledge, Ms. Anderson? And furthermore, do you have in mind any examples of countries who suggested putting in place justice mechanisms for crimes in wartime?
Latter question, I can't speak to any justice initiatives to address sexual-based violence. Certainly what you are reporting is consistent with what we've heard, and we've made a strong case that the Government of Canada should make the case that as part of the essential package of interventions in humanitarian crises, SRHR is critical and central. It's often thought of as additional, and that's, women's health in general, right down to obstetric care, but certainly access to contraceptives and abortion is considered extra. And so we've called for, this to be part of the package of essential services that are delivered in any crisis situation.
Dr. Natalia Kanem, who is the Undersecretary of the UN for the UN Population Fund, said to the committee that one of the most profitable methods is to deal with maternal death is to use midwives, and there's currently a shortage of 900,000 midwives worldwide. Do you think that this is also a solution that should be supported by the Canadian government to prevent problems tied to problems in maternity in developing countries in particular?
Frontline healthcare workers such as midwives are the solution when it comes to both maternal care, SRHR in general. I think the investment in community healthcare workers, in trained midwives, is the most effective intervention that Canada could support in all its development projects, and especially when it comes to women and children's health, because midwives touch on both the contraceptive care all the way through pregnancy, all the way through childbirth, newborns, and can be major interlocutors with communities and community leaders in order to promote women's health outcomes. So yes, 100%, I agree with Dr. Natalia Kemen.
So we will now go to Ms. McPherson. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today and sharing this important information with us. time and time again, we've heard from witnesses that the suppression of access to reproductive services for women, the lack of access for abortion, does not stop abortion. It simply stops safe abortion. So I'd like you to comment on that so that we do have your testimony in the record. But I also want to talk about Canada and the role we can play in terms of advocates. So Canada should be a leader ensuring that that women's rights are protected around the world. I'd like to get your sense. I know that we've done an awful lot on the feminist international assistance policy, and I think that we have done some really good things. But I'd like your perspective on where Canada can be a stronger leader, advocating for SRHR around the world, and how we're doing so far. Maybe I'll start with you, Ms. Anderson, if I could.
Thank you. On your first point, at CanWaCH, we take an evidence-based approach to our thinking on these issues, and the evidence is unanimous and clear that the restriction of abortion does not stop abortion, and I'm sure my colleague will have the numbers. It only increases unsafe abortion, and it loses women's lives. I think there's just the data is clear, is very, very clear on that. On your second question, the investments have been made, and Canada has a long trajectory of investing in women and children's health issues, and I was proud to see the $1.4 billion announcement in June of 2019, year over year, for a total of $14 billion. I think where we can do more work is on the diplomacy side, and I think having a cohesive approach, not to standing up on global stages and always just saying things, but being in conversation. I come from Northern Alberta, from a deeply religious community, and I know that these conversations are difficult. They are to be taken with a lot of care, but health is health and healthcare is healthcare, and that is the stance we should be taking, and that is the way in which we should be working with the communities and the countries that we are in bilateral relationships with, multilateral relationships, et cetera. I also think we can do a lot through multilateral agencies as a leader, pushing and promoting the areas like SRHR within the Global Fund, GFF, et cetera. And I think we can get better at having a more coordinated approach.
Thank you.
Ms. Anderson, I wanted to just follow up on the issue of the Muskoka Initiative specifically. I know you're quite familiar with the details of it, so maybe just your reflections on the impact of that. You referred to it as well in your testimony in terms of accountability, mobilization of donors. Would love to hear more from you about the Muskoka Initiative.
Thank you. As someone said, success leaves clues, and I think we should look closely at the success of the Muskoka Initiative for clues as to how we invest and engage in international development. The Muskoka Initiative was committed by the government, Canadian government, $3.5 billion over 5 years. It was a flagship initiative around our official development assistance. It moved the needle significantly by engaging other donor countries in supporting the initiative with a clear and accountable framework for what counted as an investment in Muskoka and what did not count. As well, there was a kind of a diplomatic push and effort in ensuring that these two elements of the then Millennium Development Goals that had been largely forgotten in maternal health and newborn health would be engaged in. It was somewhat comprehensive in including nutrition, especially in including researchers in the private sector.
I'm sorry I have to jump in. I'm going to give the rest of my time to Mr. Epp.
So allow me to thank Madame Dattare, Dr. Asugwa, and Madame Anderson. Thank you very, very much for your time. Your perspectives were very important, and they most certainly will be reflected in our study. Thank you kindly for your time.